Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Green, and I am here in the e-learning lab with you to share what we have developed so far for the ICAP program. And I know that there is a lot of information that we need to cover in this time, and I really want to spend about 45 minutes so that, as I mentioned, we can have a nice chunk of time to use for questions and answers. I think that's pretty important. What we want to do to kind of give you a sense of what to expect as we get going is to give you a sense of our agenda. So you see here, everyone should have received a link to these slides. They were part of the frequently asked questions from the previous session. I will be sharing these again following the webinar. As a matter of fact, Mary is recording this, so we'll have a recorded version on our webpage, as well as a PDF set of the slides with all the links. Everything that I'm sharing with you, though, is already on the web and available, so nothing is going to be something that you can't access, with one exception, and that would possibly be the appeals forms, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to that section. Our three big topics, if we're going to chunk them together today, is the first, what is the Indiana Course Access Program and how does it affect schools? Second, what can schools do to prepare for the ICAP? And then the final thing is, how will the program actually work? I plan to respond to questions, as I mentioned, so if I don't see them, Mary, I'm going to have you holler at me, because I'm realizing things may move quicker than I anticipate. But again, just a quick reminder, use the chat button, select send to everyone, and that way we will see if you have questions as we get going. So let's begin. We'll help if I can forward our slides. Okay, so here's our team, or part of our team. The ICAP program was placed within the Office of E-Learning, and many of you know our director, Candace Dotson. She's in DC today for a conference, but I, right now, am your contact person for the ICAP. The two of us are not the only ones. There are a number of people, including Dr. Keller, who are working on developing the program and supporting it so that we can have the best possible option for our state, for our schools, and our students. Because there are a number of us that are involved with this, and despite what Mother Nature may think, summer of e-learning is just around the corner, we ask that you don't direct the email to one specific person, but that you use the ICAP address. That means that for certain, someone's going to see it and you'll get a response, but it also helps us archive those really important documents because, again, this is a process. We're in a pilot phase, and so we're constantly working on improving our practice here. So that is our general team in terms of what's happening right now with the ICAP. What I'd like to do now is just really kind of give you a little background. And so you notice the first three bullets are really just kind of those main points. What you should know is that we're the 14th state to adopt this type of legislation, but the reality is that many of our Indiana schools were already solving the problem long before HEA 2030 Chapter 16 came into law. And because of this, some schools may choose not to participate in ICAP. I'll address this more as we go along, but what's important to focus on is that the ICAP is just another tool in the toolkit for meeting your students' needs by expanding learning opportunities and diversifying your curricular offerings. And when I say that, I feel like it's probably best just to imagine. Your student is getting ready to register for the next term, for the next school year. We know that more of you are doing that now in the fall rather than just the spring as traditionally had been done. But when you do register your students, you basically hand them your course catalog. Now, some of those might be digital nowadays, but you give them the course offerings. Now, in addition to that, some districts have strategic partnerships. They may have, for example, down in Evansville area, we have a tri-county center where students can go and work on career tech courses. But you may have also created a partnership with what was formerly known as the Indiana Online Academy through CISC. We know that those things exist, and we want you to continue doing that. In addition to those things, the catalog at your school actually has courses physically there in the building, all the additional things that you've created over the years and the different partnerships that you've formed. Now you also have the ICAP as an option, and what we will do is you would invite your students to go to the portal. to the course listing page, and they could see all the different classes that are available across the state in addition to what you currently offer. And that is just kind of like the big picture understanding of what ICAP is about. So when I mention the portal, what we're talking about is the website doe.in.gov/ICAP. I have put that inside the chat, so if you want a quick link to that, you can go. If anyone's like me, I love to multitask. I want to kind of dig around and play while I'm learning, so here's your chance. You'll see that the page itself has 4 icons that we rely on to direct people, and the first is students. We know that students will hopefully primarily learn through ICAP through their schools, but the reality is there are lots of ways that they can access that information. So if a student or their parent arrives at this page, ideally they would click students, and the first thing they would do was realize that this is not going to be something that they can get involved with independently. They are going to have to partner with their schools. They're going to have to work with their school point of contact to go through a registration process. But we really guide students in this particular section. We'll go more into that in a minute. Then there's the school section, and here you'll find a lot of things that were shared with your superintendent in advance and that you can go through. It's also where we include our facts. So as we have questions coming up, especially when we see repeat questions, we'll be adding those. The questions from the last webinar and any questions that come from today will be tracked so that we can compile them again and then upload those as well. Again, the archive from today's webinar as well as the slides, all of those things will be available on the schools page. And then there's a providers page. And this is where a potential vendor who would like to be a partner with the state, be an approved provider and have their courses evaluated, would go to determine what they need to do to get started in that process. It's also a very useful resource for schools to go into and to see what is it that providers have to go through, what qualifications and guidelines do they have to meet in order to be on this list. I will note, too, that providers, it's not a blanket approval. Every course is evaluated and independently and individually approved. So it's not a blanket approval process for a provider. So that's a provider and a course approval process. The fourth icon is what we call our portal. The actual portal itself is also known as the course listings. And so there you will be able to go through and sort through, as you would a traditional catalog, look for courses that are available. And there is a search tool, and you can sort the list that you get as results, and we'll look at that again in detail as we move on. So Mary is going to keep track of questions for me. I don't really see that anyone's asked anything, so I think we're in good shape to get started. Click through here. So I'm listening really quickly. Okay, so no, okay. We're going to look at how schools can prepare for the ICAP. So the first thing we ask superintendents to do is to identify their district's support team. And the support team at the corporation level really has 3 folks involved, potentially considerably more, but at the very minimum, we're looking at 3 roles. And what we wanted to start with were the corporation leads and the school point of contacts. And you, as I mentioned, you'll see 3 bullets there. There's also a mentor on this list. And then the next slide will go more into detail about what that's about, that level of support. But let's focus on the lead and the school point of contact and their significance. So regardless of a corporation's intent to utilize the ICAP offerings, we must know as a department who is filling these roles for a few reasons. The first is that the school point of contact is really the only individual with the authority to initiate a registration for a student. We have to provide those names and emails to the approved vendors so that they can verify any requests that they receive. We know that anybody can access the course listings and see who the provider contacts are, but we want our provider contacts to have a stopgap and be able to reference the list and say, okay, we're sorry, you are not the point of contact for that school, and you'll need to reach out to that person. They're the only one who can actually do your registration. The second reason is that the lead is the department's contact with or connection with the school corporation. And so he or she will ensure that we have that up-to-date list of school points of contacts. And we know that especially in the spring and into the summer, there can be a lot of transitions. And so we look to that person to be responsible for updating us on what's happened and who the current team is at your school corporation. And then they also oversee what we call the appeal process, and this was written into the legislation. So we will go very quickly over what that is. It's very basic, but that will be a one-person responsibility, and so we'll touch base on that. And then the third thing is that one person might fill both of these roles. So depending on how your school corporation is structured, it might make sense that you have a lead, and then that lead also happens to be the school point of contact for each of the schools, whether you have 3 or 1 or 12. We realize that districts need time to develop their plan and their procedures around the ICAP, and so it might be necessary to revise what your team looks like. So the people who are here in the webinar today may or may not actually be filling those roles moving into the next school year. It's a conversation that you might want to have, and we will be inviting superintendents to resubmit their surveys, their registration forms, if you would. And then if it's beyond this month and you need to do updates, you can always email us at the ICAP address. So let's move on. The mentors. So mentors are not necessarily a credentialed individual. I want to stress that every ICAP course includes the instruction from a licensed Indiana educator. Now, that may be altered, waived, if you would, based on dual credit courses, but according to Indiana law, it would have to be someone who is certified to teach that course according to the standard law around dual credit. So an ICAP mentor is not necessarily a certified individual because that certified individual is teaching the course and they are provided by the course provider, not to overuse a word. But the mentor is someone who is going to basically assist the student through the experience of being enrolled and participating in the course. So you can see we kind of highlighted they're basically working to help the students set goals and persist through course completion, and they're really going to help students stay on top of or on track for following the processes that is required by each individual course. That means the mentor will have access to the student's grade book, quote unquote, in the ICAP course, but they will not be responsible for any kind of coursework, instruction, grading, or any kind of collection of work. That is entirely the responsibility of the ICAP teacher. But we want that mentor to have the access so that they can have honest conversations with students, informed conversations with students. And there are a variety of ways that relationship can be established. Are there any questions about mentorship at this point before we move on? I don't see anybody in chat, but I want to give everyone a chance to, because I know this is something we've not really had before as a conversation. So the one example that came out of the last webinar, and I'll give real quickly, is what if we decide to offer an ICAP course that's not available in our school to a number of students at one time? This is a perfect example of how one individual could be a mentor for, say, 20 students, just as a random number. And that could be in a classroom setting. So perhaps you set aside a block of time during the day where all the students report to a location, and this person is their facilitator, their supervisor, if you would. This kind of mimics a lot of what we consider recovery classes. But that mentor could be assigned to a number of people. Mentors could possibly be from a content area. They could, it could be the guidance counselor. There are lots of different possibilities, but this is just a number of examples, and then there's more details in our PDF on the roles. Is there a minimum number of contacts the mentor must make with a student? No, Julie, that's a great question. We have not made a minimum requirement, or even for that matter, done anything too prescriptive. We've given a lot of guidance around what would be ideal, and so we would expect that each school department or each school in each district would develop their own procedures that they felt was reasonable. Thank you for that question. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the registration process. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Policy and practices. So I just mentioned that each local educational agency is going to want to develop their own policies and practices around the ICAP, And quite honestly, we would expect some of you probably already have these policies in place to some degree around offering, for example, online courses. So what we've put together is basically a set of key areas that you might want to look at. And if you have an existing policy, we encourage you to just review and refine that so that it accounts for the ICAP. We think that this will just make the process a lot easier for you to have a plan before it actually hits your school, if you would like to say it that way. There is the PDF that's shown here. It's available on the school ICAP webpage, and like I said, it can help you in organizing your next steps. So what we've done with assuming that at some point you want to inform your stakeholders, we put together some sample letters for you that introduce the ICAP. These can all be revised and personalized as you see fit, and they are available to you, again, on the web page for schools. We don't know really what folks will want to do in terms of marketing ideas. I don't know if anybody in the group has had any of those discussions already. It's entirely dependent upon, where you want to enter into the ICAP program, how much you wanted to be involved with this and offering it to your students. Again, this is kind of it's an option for you. It's not required in any way, shape, or form, but we definitely wanted to encourage you to keep your stakeholders informed, and this might be a resource that can help you do just that. Okay. So the registration process. We're going to look at this first from the perspective of the student. And this could be a student that knows about the ICAP program based on your school having informed them, or it could be a student or a parent that has learned about it in another venue and has come to the webpage and is looking at it for the first time on their own. One of the first things I want to point out again is, because we are really about local choice, that it's important to notice that in the second paragraph and at the bottom of the page in the screenshot, we reiterate that a student must be working in partnership with their school point of contact in order to do registration to get enrolled in the course. So just kind of getting that out of the way first. As I mentioned before, it's really, we want to slow the process down. We want students to take their time in making decisions about how they could potentially use the ICAP. And so we've asked them to do a 5-step process, and the first 2 steps are really essential in determining your success in an online course. We ask students to explore, and the resource you see highlighted on the right is just the PDF that we've developed initially about what are the indicators for being successful online, what are your learning styles and your learning habits, and how does that align with a successful student in an online setting. We will be continuously adding resources to this, so if your district already has some really great resources, I'd love for you to email those to us at ICAP@doe.in.gov, and I will give you credit for that on our webpage, but I feel like the more resources we have, the better, but we want to make sure that students are really seriously looking at what do they bring in terms of their style of learning and their attitude and habits so that they can be successful. Then on this next section, choose, what we've done is we have provided a couple of resources to help students make the best use of the course listings or the portal itself. And so the idea with that is that, that students can go through and they can start to evaluate and compare how providers stack up to each other, as well as what the course offerings really are involving. And these are things like considering, is this course NCAA approved? And that can be really important for some of our students. So we want to make sure that they understand what they need to look through or look at as they're moving through this course portal and not just taking it at a surface level. When you visit the course portal, you see what's on the right hand of the screen here. And you want to begin with a search process. So what we've done is giving you a couple of different options for approaching this. I will tell you quite honestly, course titles are not going to be the way that you want to search. We've talked about removing that, but it seems like an intuitive thing for people. But we want to stress to you that the titles and the courses are not uniform. Providers have the option to naming their own courses. And so they are not necessarily what I would consider the best way to search. What we recommend is that you search by content area or by course code, and those are the Indiana course codes there. Then in addition to that, you can also search by enrollment type and NCAA approval status. And you can see I've copied those boxes so you can see what happens when a student clicks on them. It will show you. So enrollment type, is this something that's open all the time, or does it have a set deadline? If they know they are working with a set deadline, maybe they're looking at a December class. You're probably not going to want to search non-continuous. They're going to probably want to eliminate those and just look at continuous enrollments. So giving students an option, and for that matter, guidance counselors and points of contact, the option to refine their search. And then once your list pops up, your results list, then you can sort that even further. So if you, for example, if you didn't search by content area, you could sort there, sorting your course titles, but also sorting by providers. So all of those functions are there for you. Mary's asking everyone to remember, if you have a question for the chat, to please make sure that you put everyone in the drop-down send to box. And okay, so how does enrollment in CTE courses on ICAP impact funding reimbursement? Denise, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. We've been asking that as well. It came up in the first session, and we have not come to a consensus yet. Our CTE team at the department is working on that. Essentially, what we are saying is that what applies in the brick and mortar setting applies in the virtual setting. So if the course was one that would have been approved for the funding, then logically it would still be approved. But there are some nuances to that they want to work out before we publish any kind of a formal answer. So that's something that we're still working on. Yeah, Dr. Keller's on. Great, Dr. Keller, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you reinforced that idea of discussing the conversation before even considering enrollment. What's the likelihood of success based on your learning styles and your expectations? Okay, so I'm going to move on. Mary, let me know if I missed any questions. It looks like I think I got them all. Oh, I'm sorry. Julie had a question. So if the course titles may or may not be accurate, can we award credit based on the course number? Yes, we are certain that those course numbers are aligned to the courses. That was part of them being approved for the ICAP, and that's why we include them in the listings. We want people to be able to see that very easily. So yes, absolutely. Those courses would be aligned exactly based on those numbers. Okay, and so Dane, your question about the responsibility for failure, because that is a very multifaceted question. It actually falls on, yes, it falls on both. Dr. Keller just jumped in there really quickly. It is shared. Let's see. I think I've got everything. Does the mentor also have school point of contact? Okay, so does the mentor have able to have school point of contact access to the ICAP providers? So Elizabeth, if I understand correctly, you're asking me, could a mentor get in touch with a provider point of contact? That wouldn't necessarily be the contact that the mentor would have. The mentor would have contact with the course instructor, the course teacher. So once the student's enrolled, the point of contact who is at the school would say to the provider, I need to have the teacher's contact information so that I can share that with my school mentor, with the ICAP mentor, and I'm giving you the mentor's information so that you can put that person in the system and they can access the student's progress. And then the ICAP point of contact would also reach out to the mentor and to the student to inform them of that new relationship, that they'd be working together in this course, and share any of the relevant information as far as point of contact or school ICAP teacher contact with the mentor. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to move on for the sake of time. This is still thinking about the portal. So when you're in the course listing and you have got your list of results, you will see something that looks like this. What we encourage, we are talking about in the chose, that step of choosing, we want students to understand how to go deeper. So this is the surface level. We want them to open up the links, and we want them to explore those course descriptions. The one caveat I think is important, it's not really intuitive. For the kids, it probably is. For us adults, maybe not so much. But when you're on this particular slide, or when you see this particular page, it's important to go back and use your back arrow in the navigator and your browser, because there's not a way to go back per se, and that's just a little nuanced thing. I like this example though. It's a search that was yielded by going in and looking at content area, and what I like about it is that it does give us an example of all of the current providers. So all 6 providers have a course in social studies, for example. I will note that Indiana Online is listed in 2 ways right now. We are changing that. The Indiana Online Academy, as they were formerly known, is now just Indiana Online. And so if you are searching that, and you'll see in this next example, when you open it up over here in their provider detail page, it has the old name. We're going to be updating all of those and adjusting that so that all is uniform. What you see on the left side of the screen is when you've clicked on that course title and code, it opens up the course description. And so there are certain areas that are broken down so that you can kind of give a quick glance and see all the things that are applicable, but then there's some course detail. There is that link. It was a blue arrow pointing over to what looks like the example of what happens when you open the provider description. Provider descriptions, it's important to note, include the drop policy. They also include if a vendor is using a third-party content provider. That content provider is different than using a third-party tool. For example, most of these providers use a learning management system. So your students might be using Canvas in your school, or maybe Classroom from Google or Schoology, and in their ICAP course, they could very well be using a different learning management system. That is not what we're talking about when we're talking about third-party content provider, though. What we're actually talking about there is the example would be that the provider has a contract with another agency, like, for example, Florida Virtual Schools, or, well, let's just say that for right now because that's what comes to the top of my mind. But they have one of their own instructors teaching the course, the provider does, but they're using a course shell and content and curriculum from another person. So that is definitely something to look at there. And then you see there's 2 circles here. These are both places where you can find who is the person you would reach out to initiate registration. And you'll also notice the golden arrow pointing down to the very important point that we are telling kids once again, students and families, if you have arrived here and you have not already connected with your school point of contact, now is the time to do that, because this is the individual that you'll be working with. If a student is to click on that, what they will come to, I'm going to skip a slide, they'll come to this ICAP contact page. This will allow them to put in their school corporation, and then they'll see that on the list. They can click on it, and it will open what you see on the right, which is all the schools that are associated with that district that we are informed about will have their points of contact. So that might look like, for example, just to randomly say Bremen might pop open. There would be only one high school, and they would just have that one person listed. If, in this case, you see each school has their own separate point of contact each. So 5 schools, 5 points of contact. There is nothing to say that a school couldn't have 5 schools and 1 point of contact. That same person manages all of those. It's really on the, again, going back to school decision about, or local decision about policies and practices. So if your district is not yet determined if they're going to accept requests for ICAP, it may be in your best interest to have one person managing all of those decisions and conversations. It really is a personal call on that. Now, I'm going to go back to the slide just for a second so you can see again under register. We repeat again and again, make sure you get in touch with that school point of contact. We do that because we don't want people reaching out necessarily to the department, because we feel like, again, being it's a local choice, you need to be able to have those conversations with folks. Now, we do have a place where they can email us if they can't locate their point of contact, and that could very well happen. We have done our best to reach out to every superintendent in the state. Unfortunately, we are finding that that didn't necessarily happen in all cases, and so or surveys didn't get responded to. So if a student finds that their school is not listed, their district's not on the list, they can email us, and then we will directly email that district again and reach out and ask if we can get a contact for that student so that they can begin that conversation. And the next two steps, 4 and 5 of the students, are really about the follow-through. And this kind of goes back to that question about the mentor. This is where you decide, how much is an appropriate minimum contact. What should it look like? Some students might need daily contact. Others may be better just checking in once a week, depending on the situations and what you guys have agreed. But I would certainly encourage you to make those decisions in advance and not in the middle of the process. It would be a lot smoother for everybody. I'm going to look back at questions. It looks like Dr. Keller's answering some of these. So Julie, your question about the cost. I'm going to go back to that last slide. Down here at the bottom, I should have pointed out, there's the cost. And they do vary, so every provider determines the course for each of their courses. And that does mean that there will be providers who have different costs for different courses. I think of Ivy Tech as an example. The other question that came out of the last session was, are there additional costs involved with any of these courses? No. The answer is the cost you see there is all-inclusive cost for the district for the student to participate in that course. So there won't be additional costs that you would have to concern yourself with, such as, especially for dual credit, you wouldn't be paying tuition on top of that. You'd just be paying this course. Any other questions? Sorry, it's never as easy to read and talk at the same time as one might think. Okay, so there was a question about who was responsible for the cost, and it just popped away from me. Is the student and parent solely responsible for the cost of course? What about free reduced lunch? I'm going to talk about parents' potential responsibility for costs a little bit further down the slide when we get to the idea of being able to deny enrollment. But the school district is who pays the cost, and that's slightly mentioned here on this slide. Upon enrollment, 50% of the cost is payable. This comes from state monies that are given to you based on student enrollment. And then at the completion of the course, the remaining 50% is due. We do outline in state guidance, it's attached, there's a PDF in the school section of the ICAP page that goes into detail about what completion of the course means. And this is where we talk about failure and success being both a shared responsibility. So when it's time for a student to be registered, if a school determines, yes, we want to participate, yes, the student is a good match, this is a course that fits what we've described as being an appropriate choice, the point of contact for the school would message the provider contact, just like you saw on those 2 screenshots. There's different ways you can figure out who that person would be. They would then verify that you are the person on the list as the point of contact. They will need your student's SPN, and we ask for that because we use that for reporting purposes, and there are reports that we'll be generating from the state, working with our vendors, taking the burden off the schools as much as possible so that we can meet legislative requirements, as well as really, again, reflect on what we were doing and how we can improve this program. The last thing the school point of contact would do in this registration process is, again, like I mentioned, inform the student who their ICAP mentor is, work with the mentor to make sure that they're matched up with a course provider, teacher, and move forward from there. At the completion of the course, the school point of contact also will be making sure that credit is given on the transcript according to the course that the student finished. And again, if it's on the list, it's approved and it matches what we have in the catalog according to the course code. So there shouldn't be any question about is the course eligible for credit. It is fully creditable. I'm going to go back and quickly, it looks like Dr. Keller is doing most of these. I appreciate that, Dr. Keller. Thank you. I'm going to move forward. If I've missed anything, you guys can let me know. We're at the appeals process now, and this one is pretty important. So I mentioned the school can deny a student's request for a course, and when that happens, it's the school's responsibility to notify the parent that they have the right to appeal to the Department of Education. And so if that this decision is taken up, then we will initiate a process, which I'll show in the next slide. The school, just for reference for anyone who hasn't committed to memory the legislation, I want to make sure that we talk about the 3 reasons that schools can deny requests. The first is that the course is not furtherance of the student's graduation or certification requirements. The student's enrollment in the course would exceed requirements for a normal full course load. Or the third is that the course access program course is logistically infeasible. Now, this is the one reason that school would deny that a parent could say, well, we want to go ahead and pay for the course anyhow. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So if a parent has taken up the school's offer to file an appeal with the department, they will fill out a digital form and send that to the department. They'll submit it. It goes automatically to the ICAP notifications. And what we will do upon that receipt is we will put together the contact information, let the lead ICAP point of contact at that school district know who we received a request from or an appeal from, and we will include a form for them to complete. They will have 3 business days to complete that, and we have to limit that because we only have a certain amount of time to make a determination and file that. So upon receipt of the school's response, we will have personnel review both surveys, make the final enrollment decision, and then inform both the parent and the ICAP lead of that decision, as well as provide an explanation. Unfortunately, if the school does not submit the response in 3 business days, they cannot contest the appeal based on any lack of information. So I want to be very clear about that. So very basic. Really, when it comes to the parent form, we've outlined, again, reviewed the rules because we want to be very clear in case they haven't read that anywhere else. We want them to see that right while they're filling out this form. The information we ask them is, again, basic. For what reason was it denied, your contact information, the school information, so that we can get in touch with the lead. And then the lead will receive the second form that's on the right. I kind of highlighted the notification about the timeline, the sensitivity for time. Again, we give you the information that was provided to us and then ask you if you want to expand on that, explaining to us so that we can make our determination. Yes, that's a really good question about the multiple languages, and we will make sure that I put that on my to-do list. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yes, Tammy, it is a school choice about participation. And it looks like Dr. Keller is getting, again, most of these questions. If I missed anything, let me know. We're at 40 after, so I want to go through the next couple of slides to make sure that we hit the big points, which are really actually quite quick, and then we can go into a full question and answer. So preparing your business office for the ICAP would be another piece that's really important. This is, again, not just if you are going to for sure participate. You may have a student whose parent, as I mentioned before, decides to request that they pay for it themselves, and this is legitimate under that 3rd reason for denial. And in that case, even if your district is not planning to participate in the ICAP, you may want to work with your business office in advance to develop a plan in case parents do take up on that option to pay. But if you are planning to participate, what we do suggest you do is establish a relationship with the vendors. Once you know that, your business office can refer to the State Board of Accounts if there's any questions about establishing a payment process, but this essentially works like any other vendor's relationship. So whether you're planning to participate or not, we definitely encourage you to have your leadership in your district level working with your office, business office, to make sure that they're prepared for any of these contingencies. So our plan going forward, we are, again, fully aware that there will be changes in personnel over the spring and summer, and so we will continue to accept changes right now using the original form for the rest of this month, and then following that, we're going to close the form, and you can email changes, but we will reopen the form at the end of summer, July and August, so that if anybody needs to do updates in the reason we do that is because our IT office works with us. They take our spreadsheet results, and they basically can do a quick upload into the web page and instantly have everything updated for our students and for yourselves as well. In August, we are going to be, for sure, having the ICAP web pages updated. We want to bring on or add to this some onboarding videos. This week we'll have this video there, but we want to make some nice short ones so you don't have to sit and listen to an hour-long webinar to just get one little nuance that you need. So if you're thinking that there's something you really want to see a video on that walks you through a step or walks the family through a step, let me know, because we'll make sure that we create those. Ongoing, we're going to be updating course offerings. I mentioned to you we're going to be doing some changes, for example, with Indiana Online. They've made some adjustments, so we're going to be updating all of those course offerings as things happen. If we're in a pilot right now, so we don't anticipate adding more courses this time, but if something were to happen like that, we would reach out to the leads who could then pass that information on. We'll be updating all of the facts sections and the different pages on the web, ICAP website. And then we'll be publishing program reports in the fall semester. So, and there again is your email address for the ICAP program, which again, multiple of us will receive that. So it's the best address to use for seeking some insights. Will the appeal process be available for parents in multiple languages? Okay, that was the other question. All right, so now let's go ahead and do this. You're welcome to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, especially if there's something that I missed in the chat. And that way we can use our last 15 minutes to really make sure that you leave with the information that you need. Dr. Keller, would you like to say anything? Okay. So everybody's feeling pretty good? Is there a minimum grade level for participation? That is a great question. We haven't set a minimum per se, but we've set as high school students. I'm assuming that's what you mean by grade level. And we did that based on the language of the legislation when we're talking about graduation and career credential readiness. So there's not a hard minimum grade level. We know that there may be students that are in lower levels that are working on those very requirements. So we would address that as the case. Are courses supported with UDL? Yes, Denise, great question. All of the courses have had to be evaluated on two levels, if you would. One, in terms of online development, and so we've used Quality Matters and INICL standards for those. UDL plays into both of those. And additionally, we have had everyone submit that they've completed an accessibility report. The actual title escapes me. It's listed on the vendor, on the provider page. But there is a process where you can go through and you evaluate all of your online resources for accessibility. And so we've required both of those evaluations to be done for each course that's being offered, that's been approved. Kelly, that's a great question. How do we handle students with learning disabilities and accommodations? Our department's special education office has worked very hard on developing procedures and guidance around online learning in general. So not just for the ICAP, but for all situations, because as I mentioned, we know a lot of districts already have used online learning as a solution for meeting students' needs prior to the ICAP being available. And so they've developed some guidance that was listed in the last set of faxes, frequently asked questions from the last session. It's going to be published on our webpage. In addition, they are working on an overall guidance. But bottom line is that they require, require is a good word. They require that the students support team has a meeting, and I know there's an official title and I can't think of it at the moment, but they have a meeting and review the IEP and make sure that there's a plan for students' needs being met. And then once the student is in the course, there are other steps that they require or suggest. And so all of that's been detailed, and we will have that published on the ICAP page. Again, you're welcome to unmute and use your microphone to ask a question. I'm trying not to answer things that I know that Dr. Keller got. I see some really great questions, most of which Dr. Keller received, but I will definitely be, as I said, consolidating these into a question and answer set from the training webinars, and we will post those for everybody on the web page. Okay, yes. Okay, so not having heard any questions, Mary, are you able to unmute everybody if they choose to say something?
I can unmute everybody, but that might be a mess.
It could be a mess. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't what was hindering anybody. Okay, well.
One question, Michelle, that I'm not sure if it got answered, and if it did, I'm sorry to be redundant, but if the course titles may or may not be accurate, can we award credit based on the course number? Yes, so to repeat that one, yes, remember that we are going by course code, by the course number. We know that those courses are aligned. We approved them. We allowed providers to continue to use their original names. However, they are aligned under the Indiana course descriptions, and so thereby they're approved. So when you see that course code under the title, you know that that code is what we're actually talking about. Does that make sense? Yeah, focus on the numbers. Thank you, Dr. Keller. Yes, Julie, that's a great question. Can you choose to only accept particular providers? Absolutely. I mean, again, this is something where local choice and taking time to go through and develop some policies and practices really makes sense. And quite honestly, a number of you probably already have relationships with some of these providers. I think, for example, of the dual credit. There may not be a need for you to use the ICAP offerings because you may already have an established relationship with a provider, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly logical. Yes, and Dr. Keller did mention that there are 2 providers, and you'll see this because they have an asterisk next to their course listings. So I'll just go ahead and mention it. Right now there's just 2, so it makes it easy. That the Indiana Virtual Academy, or oh gosh, now I say that, yes, Academy, IDA, and the Evansville, let me go to my course listing and see this really quickly. You're probably going to see me jump out. Oh, maybe my internet's working a little too slowly. Janet Leisner's online, so please forgive me when I butcher the name of the Evansville Virtual Academy, but they both offer discounts for multiple students. So that's one of those situations where you could reach out to their point of contact and get the details of what you're looking for and what they would provide for you. Okay, so seeing that we're not having questions, you're more than welcome to stay if something comes to mind, but other than that, we are going to go ahead and close the webinar. We'll stay on for the next 10 minutes so to answer questions. Thank you very much for giving up your time today. I hope it's been valuable. Do follow up with us at will and let us know how we can be of further assistance to you. I'll put this back here so that you've got our email. Thank you so much.